how this tzaddik lived, how he treated others, but how he lived himself with an incredible histapkus, incredible making do with a little. First off, he's in America. What's his first job in America? There's a reason no one's ever heard of him. He turned down all the rabbinical posts that he was offered. He was offered many, many rabbinical posts. Lubavitch wanted him to be Rosh Yeshiva. They wanted him in Chachmei Lublin at a certain point to be Rosh Yeshiva, but he didn't want any of that. And initially, the only job he found was collecting old newspapers. Remember, he was porting in pre-war. He was porting in Europe during World War I. He's collecting old newspapers and selling them by weight to the newspaper companies for recycling. His only consolation was that it didn't demand any focus, so he kept his mind on learning while he was selling the newspapers. Until eventually, he made money earning a morning Mishnayos class in Chizik Emunah, a shul which we'll talk more about, and he had an afternoon Gemara share, Rosh Hashanah shul. These were probably sharing with 10 to 20 people each, and he had no interest in falling into the American dream. He was mistapik muad, which was totally unheard of in America. It was so against the culture. And there, as was mentioned before, Gifter said that it was like a little piece of Sakhachev which was transported from Sakhachev to Baltimore. And everybody realized there's something totally out of the ordinary. And people living in an entire different plane. What did he eat? He had no interest in food. His meals consisted of nothing more than a small piece of challah left over from Shabbos, dipped into a bowl of soup once a day, and he was machmir to wait 24 hours. Again, we're talking about the anhaga of a gon and a tzaddik. It's not for us, just to take it in a little bit, what people were like. One day he would have milchig, next day fleishigs, following, just like Mar Ukva's father, that only ate milk after 24 hours of meat. It was pretty amazing. His sister made him a cake, and she asked him, did you like the cake? And he said, Genendel, I care nothing about food, right? And a certain conservative rabbi, I've never quoted a conservative rabbi before, but you'll see why I'm quoting him now. He wrote recollections of the youth, and he wrote, I have no trouble believing in the legends recorded in the Talmud, including what is written of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, who learned Torah for a cave for 13 years. After all, with my own eyes, I witnessed Rav Forshlager sitting and learning in his tiny room where there was barely space to move, surrounded by nothing but his holy books for over 30 years. So he made hashpah on people, right? Money. What did he do with people gave money? People wanted to give him money. He says, you want to give me money? I don't have what to do with the money I already have. What would I do with more, right? People estimated, besides his svarim, which we'll talk more about, but besides his svarim, he maybe had $20 worth of stuff in his whole house. It's incredible. People wanted to buy him a house in a better neighborhood. He refused. Stayed in the same rented house. People left him money in his will. He resisted taking the money. When his friend Mr. Nathan Adler of Baltimore died, he left him a sizable bequest in his will, and he donated it all to charity. This is incredible tzidkus. Eating, and let's see some more about that. 126. He limited sleep to 3 hours per night and never napped during the day. In Poland, he once remarked that in later years, he suffered a heart attack. Again, this is not for us, just these people live on a different plane, but it's good to know that the Bali Masor, what kind of plane they lived on. It's been pointed out. He had a heart attack, and the doctor said he has to sleep 8 hours. Again, we follow Rabbi Salanti, you have to listen to your doctor. And he refused to consider it, and he said it's totally unrealistic. Family members pressured him. He added 1 hour. And they used to remark painfully, in Poland, I had 2 hours of sleep a night, was enough for me. But now I have to sleep like a bear, 4 hours. Okay? Moshe Yaakov Burak, who was a Talmud of his and a Rav himself, related that I was talking to the Rav and learning, and he opened a sefer at a certain point, and they're tucked between there's a wad of dollars that would have been enough to buy a car. I watched the Rav closely to see how would you react? If I had enough money here in this little book to buy a car, you would see it, right? See how he would react? I could not detect the slightest hint of surprise or amazement on his face. I asked him about it. He couldn't remember. Someone probably brought it to him when he was in the middle of learning. He just put it in the safer. Even such a large sum made no impression on him. And remember, he was extremely poor his whole life. After he passed away, thousands of dollars were found between and inside many of his farm, all apparently given to him while learning and promptly discarded. Once, Rav Ruderman, the famed Rosh Yeshiva of Bnei Yisrael, related that, and this is about his opposite Torah, I visited him in the middle of the day and asked him a particularly difficult question. He didn't have an answer. About 1:30 in the morning, the telephone rang in my house. I answered, who was on the line? Rav Forshlager, speaking excitedly. I found an appropriate answer to your question. And he gave me a whole foundation of arguments that allowed him to resolve all the issues. And I asked him where he was calling from. He didn't have a telephone in his house, right, because he was worried it would cause Bittul Torah. So he said, I went to the bar down the street from my house. They have a phone and I'm calling from there. I didn't want to leave this type of question without an answer. Amazing. How about when it came to others? When it came to others, right, even though he had no money himself, when it came to others, he collected and distributed huge amounts of money. We talked about ways he was mashpia. That was another way. He collected tzedakah for people. And he used to quote the words of the Alshich, who was very held in high esteem in Sakhachev. It was beautiful. It says Usher, it says about Usher, Shmeina Lachmo v'yishlach Madani Amelech, something like that, right? In Parshat Vayechi. I'll do it in English. His bread will be fat, and he will supply the delicacies of the king. So that's the pasuk. The Alshich says a beautiful pshat that Usher sufficed with the little, and they even viewed their shtickle bread, right, as a rich meal. His bread is fat, means Usher, in Usher's view, Shmeina Lachmo. Look how much I have, right? And that's all he had. But for others, you have to give Madani Amelech. That's that's the shleimus. Some people, right, are large for themselves and large for the others. Some people are large for themselves, not large for others. Some people are chintzy on themselves and chintzy for others. Rav Forshlager was the opposite. For himself, Shmeina Lachmo, Gavaldig, have a piece of bread from Shabbos and a milchige soup. Tomorrow will be in a fleishige soup. Nifla. But for others, Madani Amelech, you should have much to eat.